Hello and welcome to the show where I try and make a little sense out of this stunning and increasingly brave new world that we all live in by talking to a series of expert witnesses about their experiences, interests and concerns. It's important in life to be in touch with your feelings, but it's also crucial to be able to back those feelings up with facts. And so the purpose of this show is to push past purely personal or political promoting positions, separate fact from fiction and fake news headlines in the hope of uncovering important home truths. And today I'm talking to politician, public speaker, conference coordinator and occasional quarter of controversy, Mike Buchanan. In 2013, Mike founded the political party Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them, who he claims to this day remain the only political party in the English-speaking world directly campaigning for the human rights of men and boys. In May of this year, Mike announced his decision to step down as party leader after 7 years in charge, revealing that his colleague Elizabeth Hobson would be taking the reins going forward. So I invited Mike to come on the show to look back at his time leading J4MB, and in particular talk about what he thinks have been the party's biggest achievements since its inception in 2013. Mike duly came up with a list, and so without any further ado, let's just jump straight into it and consider Mike Buchanan's retrospective of his work with Justice for Men and Boys.
So I have a list of areas, 13 in fact, that I'd like to talk about briefly. Things that kind of strike me as probably the most important things that Justice for Men and Boys has done in the past, 7 and a bit years, I guess. We launched in February 2013. And I think I'd have, as my first thing, raising public awareness of men's issues and feminism via mainstream media coverage. Now, since we launched in February 2013, no men's issues or anti-feminist organizations or individuals in the world have attracted more mainstream media coverage than us. We have almost all our TV and radio appearances on our YouTube channel, and I'm sure we must have passed more than 150 with the BBC alone. In comparison, the print media has been frustratingly disinclined to give us exposure, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I had hoped that they would take an interest in the fact that we've beaten the Labour Party to having a female leader, but so far nothing. Number 2, raising public awareness through what we call news aggregation. So this is posting links to, in the main, newspaper articles on various things.
These are the stories that you kind of post on your website.
Yes, and so sometimes with commentary, some not. I mean, some of them just stand on their own 2 feet. There's no need for us to comment. I guess there's lots on there about false allegations through male suicides as a result of false allegations and so on. But so there's a lot there. And we've posted in the 7 years more than 10,000 blog pieces, so there's a lot of content there.
Yeah,
I think we've done a good job of aggregating news stories of interest to people with an interest in gender issues, men's issues, and feminism. And I'd like to thank all the people who take the time to send us those links and take the time to comment on them. There's lots of people who must spend half an hour or an hour a day and commenting on various stories that we publish, and those comments are always very welcome. The stories have mainly been about the UK, but many have related to outside the UK. Number 3, raising awareness of men's and boys' issues in our 2015 General Election Manifesto. Now, a number of people had, before 2015, made an effort to develop a comprehensive list of men's and boys' issues, but seldom was there much in the way of detailed commentary. But in December 2014, we published our 80-page long manifesto for the coming election. I don't know if ours was the longest manifesto, but I'll bet it was among the longest. And it covered 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the actions and inactions of the state, almost always to privilege women and girls. Today, I'd probably have 24 or 25 areas, but I think the document was a good start, and I still link to it on almost a daily basis.
And what sort of feedback did you get about the manifesto?
Oh, it was all very positive. With people who engage with it. We'd get the odd sort of feminist saying she disagreed with it. But it is absolutely chock-a-block with statistics and facts and so on. Links to people like William Collins, whose output is just bomb-proof.
didn't you then stand in that election?
Stood in 2015, yes,
Yeah.
in Sutton, Nashville, the seat of the then Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, Gloria De Piero.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And did she comment on the manifesto or challenge you in anything?
No, she didn't really have to engage. We gave her 2 Lying Feminist of the Month awards.
Did she just ignore you? Was that?
Oh yes, and of course the media didn't take any of it up, so she wasn't. She didn't have to account for herself. We had a BBC Radio Hustings, so this is basically all the candidates in a room with an invited audience. The invited audience was 100% female. The questions put were 100% about women's issues. And I asked the female BBC producer afterwards why there was, why there was nothing about men's issues, why there were no men in the audience. And she said, well, 52% of the voting population are women. I mean,
Okay.
really, you wonder whether people like that manage to put on matching shoes in the morning, don't you?
And was her argument basically that the hustings was specifically about women's issues? Was that?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, it's just the most pathetic excuse. So, had 52% of voters been men, would we have had, an all-male audience asking only questions about men's issues? Of course not. It was just.
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to clarify kind of, the way sometimes they do hustings on particular themes, and that's that very often tends to be sort of the issue with kind of gender equality.
Oh, I see. Right.
Is that it's broached purely as the women's issue then?
Well, I mean, with the BBC, of course, it always would be. But it was broadcast live, and we each had, I think, a minute or 2 minutes to talk into the mic. And so I just basically sort of lashed out at BBC bias for how outrageous they were for 2 minutes, and they were very pleased to take the mic back, I can tell you.
Okay.
So number 4, raising public awareness of how evil feminism is and has always been. It's perhaps difficult to believe now, Brian, but back in 2013 when we launched the party, there were some people of the view that it was possible and even desirable to campaign for the human rights of men and boys without challenging feminism and feminists. To me, that view was always ludicrous, and I'm proud that we're as strongly anti-feminist today as we were on the day that we launched.
Okay.
So, for example, Elizabeth Hobson is perfectly clear that she's an anti-feminist. I admire any woman, who publicly outs herself as an anti-feminist, because an awful lot of them will identify as non-feminists.
Yeah.
But there is that extra mile in saying anti-feminist, which women tend to be disinclined to go. I mean, Janice Fiamengo will, and Karen Strawn will, of course. But there's still not many women who are absolutely out there as anti-feminists.
Yeah, I don't think there are necessarily that that many men either. And it's, I mean, to be honest, it's not a term that I, particularly lean into, or
Okay.
Be curious to kind of explore that in terms of, I completely understand sort of the logic of it's impossible to engage on men's issues without criticizing feminism, because feminism is basically the monopoly show, or the monopoly ideology in terms of gender, and is doing no benefit to men and their rights. So yeah, no, just sort of curious, in terms of the emphasis on the anti, I suppose, kind of, I sometimes wonder whether that sometimes detracts from the message of kind of men's rights. Have you ever think that?
Yeah, no, I understand that point, but at the end of the day, feminists are behind so many of the human rights abuses. You say, why are there virtually no places for male victims of domestic violence? Feminists, full stop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I think it's a complicated one, because it's that kind of balancing act. Because in terms of, very often are kind of hit pieces or very kind of biased reporting on the area of men's rights, and it's kind of very often portrayed as anti-woman.
Well, right, but we can't stop that, Brian. It's it's something that we have to argue, and I don't think you get around that by not calling yourself an anti-feminist.
Yeah, no, I suppose the point is I kind of respect that people have different approaches, and I very much respect that kind of you and Elizabeth are kind of very upfront about that perspective. I think it's a curious one to examine, because I suppose it's about how to most effectively get the message through on kind of men's rights. And I do agree it's difficult to do that without criticizing feminism.
But can we stay on that, Brian? I think that's a really, really important point.
Yeah.
And there is, I suppose, still a stream of people. I mean, I'm thinking of people like Glenn Poole, Ali Fogg, and others. And in the UK, I guess they have sort of been absorbed into I think the Men and Boys Coalition.
Yes.
Which never criticizes feminism or feminists, as far as I can see.
Yeah. Well, perhaps not entirely, but yes, no, I would agree. They're very, very, kind of cautious.
Right. But the important point for me, Brian, is that their caution has not led to exposure. I mean, I could absolutely understand the legitimacy of the argument if it said you'll get far more media coverage, for example, if you don't attack feminism and feminists. But there must be 50 individuals and organizations under the umbrella of Men and Boys Coalition. And we have had 10 times more mainstream media coverage than those people all combined. So what, to me, it just shows that avoiding criticizing feminism and feminists, or calling themselves anti-feminists, it doesn't make any difference. Literally,
that's why. No, I do think it is an interesting one to explore, because as you say, your party has kind of managed to get a lot of mainstream exposure, and part of kind of certainly what I have witnessed with J4MB is that they have and yourself have contributed massively to kind of breaking the Overton window in terms of even getting those conversations discussed in kind of more mainstream media kind of domains, and I don't doubt that kind of part of your strategy has that's being part of your strategy in terms of the likes of your monthly awards, etc.
Right.
Because that sort of kind of generates controversy. I suppose, yeah. No, it's kind of it's one that I kind of constantly kind of struggle with. I guess in terms of, I think particularly sometimes I certainly find that kind of it's impossible to talk about kind of removing barriers to male inequalities without criticizing the dominance of feminism and its lack of regard to kind of men's rights.
Yeah. This is exactly the point, I think, Brian, that the human rights of males are trampled on so as to privilege females. I mean, they are two sides of the same coin. So the idea that you can do anything about, not for all, but for many men's issues, without tackling the fact that 99.9% or 100% of public funding, for example, goes towards females rather than males. I mean, I've never found convincing, for example, this argument that on the domestic violence front. I mean, I understand why certain organisations say that they don't want to withdraw a penny from women's shelters and so on.
Yeah,
they just want equivalent provision for men. But where's that going to come from? The left-wing magic money tree? And frankly, if the available government money for domestic abuse refugees is doubled, it would still all go to women's refugees and women's organisations. As we've seen recently, another £20 million for the DA sector. And the only organisations that can apply for it are national organisations.
Yeah.
Well,
No, it's been shocking watching the progress of the domestic abuse bill,
Yeah.
and how loaded the deck is in terms of even the witnesses that have been invited
Yes.
to give evidence. So it is. Yeah. I guess it's an interesting paradox, because particularly sometimes I think kind of things like those awards, they then become very easy for feminists to point the finger of criticism at. And it's
Right, but not valid criticism, Brian. So, for example, they'll. One of the happiest moments of my life, it's up there with the birth of my kids,
yeah.
was being in the public gallery of the House of Commons, the chamber of the House of Commons, when a particularly miserable Labour Party feminist, Paula Sheriff, I think her name was,
Okay.
gave out the names of the Lying Feminist of the Month awards, Gormless, Toxic. That was just great, because while they might complain about Lying Feminist of the Month awards, for example, no feminist has ever said to me that woman didn't lie. That basically no feminist has ever been able to argue the validity of those awards.
Yeah. Okay.
We haven't actually done them for a few years now, because there's only so much time you can devote to Lying Feminists and Gormless Feminists. And
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what? Moving on. What about number 5 then?
Okay, number 5, conferences. And again, this is all about raising public awareness. So the international conferences on men's issues, I think you've been to 2 or 3 of them, Brian, haven't you?
Yeah.
The ICMIs, are probably the most tangible major manifestation of the global men's rights movement. A year after I launched J4MB, the first ICMI was hosted by Paul Elam and his colleagues at the Voice for Men in 2014. It was scheduled for a DoubleTree Hilton in downtown Detroit, but death threats were received by the hotel against the conference organizers, the speakers, conference attendees, hotel staff, you name it. It clearly wasn't going to be a viable venue. So Terence Popp, who's the comic genius behind Redonkulous.com, was an ex-military guy, and arranged for the event to go ahead at a veteran of foreign wars facility near Detroit, a place called Sinclair Shores. I spoke at that along with maybe 10 others, including Karen Strawn, and the atmosphere was really something special. And only one feminist protester turned up. I think the only feminist protester ever to turn up at an ICMI, funnily enough. Now, on our YouTube channel, we have a video playlist of all the talks, along with playlists of the 4 later ICMIs and the 3 Messages for Men conferences, co-hosted by Elizabeth Hobson and Natty Raymond. And Elizabeth is solely responsible for the Messages for Men conferences going forward. And the next will be in London on the 14th of November. But I think the ICMIs, Brian, to me, have been there's been a real evolution. If you look at the sort of thinking and the sophistication of thinking today compared to 2014, it's been a lot of progress, I think.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. Having kind of looked at that in Chicago, and even the fact that we're kind of like 2 rooms running.
Yeah.
Last year, and everybody was absolutely saying, and kind of talking to Tom
Caulfield, our technical director,
who's kind of done filming for many of them, that it has very much progressed. And it's great that you have such a database of speeches now, which obviously will include links to which kind of look there to stand the test of time. And it is interesting that you've received a lot of kind of bit of attacks and negative publicity in terms of trying to get them organized, but kind of when they actually happen, as you say, there's very little kind of protest, and they're just people there to share their experiences and talk about the issue.
So the 2014 event was very special. Over 2006 to 8, I'd worked as a business consultant for the Conservative Party at their campaign headquarters in London. And my primary area of work related to developing a new commercial model for conferences.
Okay.
The Tory party were then, and for all I know still are, the largest conferences in Europe, drawing 12,000 or more delegates. So I knew a lot about the theory of running conferences and the financial side and so on, the cash flow streams and all the rest of it. So I declared that J4MB would host an event an ICMI in the UK. And demographics meant we'd struggled to cover the cost of an event outside London, I'm sorry to say. But it soon became apparent that venues were not keen on hosting a men's rights conference. A number of venues told our conference venue search company they had availability on our dates, but when the company told them who the client was, the venues came up with a host of creative excuses to refuse the booking. And the most memorable probably was Amnesty International in London. Their venue was absolutely perfect and very reasonably priced. But in late 2015, they said they couldn't host the event because Amnesty is a feminist organization and we're an anti-feminist party. So if nothing else, Brian, they were honest, unlike the other venues who declined.
Yeah, it's quite incredible that Amnesty International turned out a human rights conference. So.
Well, indeed, yes, because we were completely the wrong half of the population, weren't we? So John, one of our supporters, we were getting a bit desperate. I mean, probably been turned down by 10 or 15 venues, I guess, at this point. And John, one of our supporters, suggested London Excel, the largest events and conferences venue in London. Now, I hadn't considered them before because I was sure they'd be expensive. But in the event, they were expensive, but otherwise they were perfect. And the 2016 event was a huge success, as was the 2018 event in exactly the same venue. And I think you came to that one, Brian, didn't you?
Yes, so and it was an excellent conference.
Yep. So going forward, along with Elizabeth, I'm one of the 4 organisers of this year's ICMI, to be held over the 14th to the 19th of November, ending on International Men's Day. I'm hoping we'll be able to publicise details of the event later this month. A number of things are delaying us, unfortunately. We recently hosted the first national conference on men's issues in the UK, titled "Domestic Abuse is a Men's Issue Too." It had to be a virtual conference because of COVID-19, obviously. But it went very well, and we had very good feedback, and hopefully it will be a regular in the Men's Issues diary. Now, I'm personally responsible for ICMIs held in Europe and North America, so and hopefully we'll have some more non-ICMIs in due course. But I've already started planning for a UK ICMI in August next year. More details in due course.
Brilliant. Okay. And
I think they also play a role in maintaining morale, Brian, apart from anything else. It's just wonderful to be, I mean, the thrill of meeting people like Karen Strawn. I mean, I've told this tale a few times, but in Detroit, before the Detroit conference, I've been telling myself for weeks, for God's sake, don't amble up to Karen, who was such a legend even then, stare at your feet and go, "Hi Karen, big fan." So needless to say, when I met her in the car park in the venue near Detroit, I shuffled up to her, stared at my feet, and said, "Hi, Karen, big fan."
I think a lot of people have done that.
They do. I see it at every conference, Brian. It's just hilarious. How she doesn't die 1,000 deaths every time, I don't know. But yeah, she's kind of used to it because she was very much then, and to an extent still today, the recruiting sergeant for the men's rights movement and the anti-feminist movement. I asked a lot of people in Detroit, how did you first get to learn of all this stuff? What interested you? And 3/4 of them, maybe, perhaps even more, said it was a Karen Strawn video.
Yeah, I've heard that so many times as well.
Yeah, I mean, recorded in a kitchen in Edmonton. Yeah, she was just a born communicator. I mean, on one occasion, I think it was the Australian conference. There was a press conference, and I was on the panel with Karen, and I always wanted, when the press asked me a question, to say, "Oh, I'll put that to Karen. She'll give such a better answer than I could." She's just a born great communicator.
Yeah. So can I just ask? So just to clarify, although you're kind of stepping down as leader of J4MB, you're still very much going to be involved in organising future conferences.
Yes. Yeah, I need to divide that up. So I'm personally, rather than with my J4MB connection, responsible for the ICMIs.
Sure.
But the other conferences, are now Elizabeth's responsibility. But if she wants my advice or help, obviously it's there. So I'm now the chairman of the party.
Brilliant. Okay.
So basically, I'll contribute, in the ways that Elizabeth wants.
Sure. Okay.
Number six, probably the issue that we're best known for in terms of our campaigning, male genital mutilation, MGM.
Yeah.
Anyone who follows our work, can't be unaware that carrying out MGM is a crime under the Offences Against the Person Act, 1861. I think I could say that sentence in my sleep, to be honest. Being at least grievous bodily harm. Now, we've strongly campaigned about the issue. It's been our number one issue for the past 5 years or so, until recently when Elizabeth changed it to domestic abuse, and I think she was right to do that.
Yep.
But we've protested about MGM outside circumcision clinics, the Tory party conference, at Speaker's Corner and elsewhere. Philip Davis MP majored on the issue in one of his International Men's Day debates, and it was the first time that the illegality of MGM had been outlined in Parliament, which I think is quite something.
Yeah, I remember that being a significant moment, and the minister from the Home Office, I think it was the Home Office, was unable to kind of provide an answer.
I think that was Victoria Atkins.
Victoria Atkins, yes.
Who has form in this area. Yeah, it makes you despair. The sort of things that people like that will come out with.
Am I right in thinking, did you at one stage try and take a private prosecution?
Yes, I did. Yes, of a guy called Dr. Balvinder Mehat, a Nottingham-based GP, who didn't have the permission of the mother to have a boy circumcised. I mean, what basically happened was it was a boy's grandparents. Sorry, the couple had split up. So this girl had a Muslim boyfriend, but got pregnant. And they had split up before the boy was born, and the boy's grandparents in the weekend that he was with the father took him along to this GP, who I think is a Sikh, and misrepresented themselves as having permission of the mother for the operation to happen. So he went ahead with it, and it was a terrible story. I mean, the woman was, the mother was just distraught.
Yeah.
And the boy, I mean, suffered pain and whatever else years afterwards. It's all too common a problem.
Because I mean that's sort of bringing in almost kind of additional issues, because it's not only is the issue of the kind of legality of the surgery or whatever, but as you say, kind of they didn't have the mother's permission even. So that's
but of course in purely legal terms, Brian, permission of the parents doesn't make an illegal act legal. It is. Both mother and father can
I understand that, but, kind of, and that, because it's the same with like tattoos and such, although they've actually kind of specifically legislated, to directly. But so go on. And what happened whenever you attempted?
Well, so I lodged papers at Nottingham Magistrates Court for a private prosecution of Dr. Balvinder Mehat, and had a response. One of the point that remains uppermost. One of his grounds for not allowing a prosecution was that there had never been a successful prosecution for MGM in the UK. Well, there had never been a prosecution.
There's never been an attempt, quite possibly, yeah.
There had been a couple of cases where boys had died through blood loss and so on. But even in those cases, the person who had carried out the operation, suffered no punishment. So we basically hit a dead wall on MGM, very frustratingly.
Yeah, no, I mean that strikes me kind of almost as remarkable. If you kind of, so it's basically, is it a judge kind of turns down, or is it the Crown Prosecution Service?
No, it actually was a judge, Brian.
Right, okay.
But the reality was, I mean, I was kind of expecting that to happen. But even if the judge had permitted the prosecution, the CPS could then have taken over the prosecution and dropped it like a stone, and they absolutely would have, of course.
Right. Yeah. No, that seems very odd.
but if nothing else, a lot more people today know that this is a crime. I mean, I still get people saying, "Oh, well, there's this and that statement by a judge, which means it's not a crime." But that's just completely misunderstanding how the law works. So there are a couple of judges who, it's part of a judgment, just mumbled something about it not being a crime. But that was, whether that was mischievous or ignorance, we'll
Yeah.
never know. I mean, a couple of those judges are dead now.
Well, I remember significantly, not all that long ago, I think maybe within the last year and a half, the BBC did a documentary about circumcision,
Yep.
and there was a barrister who gave the legal opinion that it certainly struck him that in all other areas the rights of the child is thought of first.
Yep.
And it was basically kind of giving the same interpretation of the law, as far as I could see, as the one you've been promoting.
Yep. Well, if anyone's in any doubt about the legal position on MGM, I advise them to look on our YouTube channel for talks by James Chegwidden, a London-based barrister.
Yeah.
He could not be clearer that this is a crime.
Okay.
It's absolutely that black and white. Which brings me to number 7, raising public awareness of the extent of feminist domination of academia. Last summer, Elizabeth Hobson and I travelled to Cambridge University to give talks. Her inflammatory, misogynistic talk title was The History of Feminism, while mine was Equal Rights for Men and Women.
Highly controversial, I'm sure.
Highly controversial. And as expected, we had huge kickbacks from the feminists. I actually originally booked a lecture hall in the department. There's a big building on the outskirts of Cambridge, which hosts politics and history and so on. Yeah. And I actually booked a room there, and I thought, and the receptionist took the booking, and I thought, you have no idea what's coming down the line on this one. So they went absolutely ape, and they said there were exams going on at the time of, at the time of the proposed talks, and with protesters outside, that would disrupt the people taking their exams. Well, the other solution was to move the protesters away, but of course that was never going to happen. So it was relocated to a lecture building in the middle of Cambridge, which was rather nice because it's more convenient. Okay. Anyway, the feminists sent an open letter full of lies and misrepresentations to the Vice Chancellor, demanding the talks be cancelled. And there was a petition for him to cancel the talks. It was signed by 507 students, alumni, and academics. Not one person from any of these groups contacted us for comment on the allegations in the open letter. So they just took them as read. Yeah. That Elizabeth, who is pretty petite, and I, an overweight 62-year-old guy, were a physical threat to female students and academics. It was really bizarre.
Yeah.
The local paper took no interest, and the only media piece before the event was in The Guardian, yes, which was predictably critical of us. So the talks went ahead anyway, despite a howling mob of young adults banging saucepans and chanting songs with lines like, "There are many, many more of us than you." We had to pay for the security operation, which was a fairly big bill, and the police took zero interest in the protesters blocking entrance to the lecture building. But at least I had the pleasure of calling this mob the Cambridge University Noisy Twat Society. The first letters of which seemed appropriate.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with that. As you know, I kind of covered sort of some of the that event, both the aftermath and yes, the allegations and stuff, and it was quite remarkable seeing and hearing just the behavior of kind of very privileged students.
Yep.
And quite shocking, and of course there was at least one assault.
Yes, I'll come on to that in a minute. Yeah. Well, the police hadn't even turned up when I and some of my colleagues had milkshakes thrown over us. at a pub in Cambridge just a few hours before the talks, and Natty Raymond, a supporter, restrained the female feminist. There was also a male feminist, but she restrained the woman and video recorded her for posterity.
Yeah.
It's a wonderfully entertaining video in which the feminist begs men to help her. This feminist basically plays the trump card of chivalry. It's a beautiful thing to see. And I think at one point she says, "Thank you, kind sir." Absolutely hilarious. Anyway, so Natty called the police 999, then video recorded the woman, and an hour later the police still hadn't turned up, so she let her go.
And this was, if I just interject, this was at sort of over a period where the kind of European elections were happening, and the trend of milkshaking had become very much a kind of kind of political issue or political football. So Nigel Farage was milkshaked. Sargon of Akkad. Yes, and in Nigel Farage's case, the police arrested the person.
Yes, and he I think it was a man, was prosecuted and fined.
Yeah.
And all we had, I think it was like £20. There were two or three of us. We each got £20 from each of the assailants. They wrote letters of apology, which were just hilarious. You know, we've definitely learned our lesson. Yeah, right. Anyway, so the protesters after the talks, they attacked John Bailey, a 40-something-year-old man who'd attended our lectures, and they also threatened his 16-year-old son. So we started a crowdfunder for John to attend the Chicago conference, and we're delighted to met its target. And you hopefully met him in Chicago.
I did, yeah. I spent a fair bit of time with him, including in the last evening. So yeah, no, he was a lovely guy. And
nice guy. And he's been down to Speaker's Corner with us campaigning a few times. So always good to see John. Okay, on to number 8, raising public awareness through promoting the work of outstanding MRAs. I think we've done a lot to promote the work of MRAs such as there's Paul Elam, Janice Fiamengo, Tom Golden, Karen Strawn, and a good many others. We've particularly done a lot to promote William Collins's work, I think. Both his blog, The Illustrated Empathy Gap, but also his book, The Empathy Gap. Now, I don't think he'd label himself an MRA, but I sort of co-opt him as one. He's a very important voice in the movement.
Yes.
I think. Now, Janice's Fiamengo files have been going for almost 5 years now, and I think it remains the gold standard of individual pieces to camera. And along with Paul Elam and Tom Golden, she appears in the weekly video series regarding men, which to my mind is the gold standard of that type.
They're excellent.
They are just outstanding. And Paul and Tom have this wonderful occasional series, You Can't Make This Shit Up.
Yes.
And one or both of them always make the point, honestly, we never struggle for material on this program, which it's always entertaining. Okay, brings me to number 9, promoting, I suppose, increasing public awareness about Philip Davis. Followers of our work will need no reminding that Philip Davis is the Conservative MP for Shipley in Yorkshire, and the only elected politician in the English-speaking world advocating regularly for the human rights of men and boys on many fronts. Now, we've been in contact with him since before he hosted the first House of Commons debate on International Men's Day in 2015, a debate which Jess Phillips MP infamously tried to prevent just a few months after she'd been elected an MP.
That's right, yeah.
And he's hosted these debates ever since then. Obviously, the last one was cancelled because of COVID. Sorry, not COVID. I'm sorry. No, it was the general election got in the way, didn't it? Of the last one. And he spoke at both the 16 conference in London on the Justice Gender Gap and at the Chicago conference on political correctness. And it's great to have at least one politician in the world that we can talk to, meet, and so on.
Yes, I mean, he's done an incredible amount. It's kind of very sad that we haven't seen really many if any others kind of follow his lead, because once somebody breaks the taboo of talking about a subject. It's
a very interesting one. I mean, he always says that he's not surprised. I mean, his colleagues, his Conservative Party colleagues, see the flack that he gets, and they think, "Thanks very much. I don't think I need that."
Yeah.
But it doesn't say much for the spine, does it, of MPs?
Well, it certainly says a lot for his spine. So
It does. It does. No, he's an amazing man. That's Philip. Number 10, raising public awareness through publicising the work of Man, Woman, Myth.
Yes.
Now, you'll be aware of a man by the name of Ro Aid, who video blogged material of a very high quality over many years before disappearing in the summer of 2015. Now, we have 119 of his videos in a playlist on our YouTube channel, along with your moving video tribute to him, which relates the key elements in his story. Long story short, he had a fall from a considerable height in 2015, which left him with such severe injuries he spent the next 3 years in a wheelchair. But more seriously, he suffered major brain damage, which wiped out memory of anything before the event, including his wife and kids. And his long-term and short-term memory are very poor to this day, I'm sorry to say. But some months ago, he started a new YouTube channel, and the appreciation he gets there from people, especially fans of his amazing body of work, video work, are really important in keeping his spirits up. And, we're in regular contact.
I've only really learned of his work, kind of whenever you raised that recently.
Yeah.
He's done an incredible body of work.
Number 11, raising public awareness through publishing books. Now, but by MRAs and so on. Now, I've self-published 10 books, the last 3 about gender issues, including feminism. And through my modest publishing concern, which I have to plug, Brian, it's in the contract, as you know, lpspublishing.wordpress.com. I've published some great books for other people. So they include Sueno Pai's Exposing Feminism, the 30 Years War Against Men, Herbert Purdy's Their Angry Creed, and William Collins's The Empathy Gap, Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect.
Yeah.
All very good books. William Collins's came out last year, and it's an absolute tour de force. I can't think of a better term for it. It's 650 pages of solid gold.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, actually, one of William's strengths is he really crunches the numbers. So he puts the data out there.
Yeah, and he often comes up with things that are just really quite startling. I remember maybe 4 years ago now, he came up with the conclusion that if men were sentenced with the same leniency as women in the UK, 5 out of 6 men in British prisons today wouldn't be there.
Yeah,
it's really quite astonishing. So if we had gender equality, the prison overcrowding crisis would disappear tomorrow.
Yeah, and yet Philip Davis was sort of lambasted for essentially quoting government statistics on that.
Yes. Of course, I mean, his view is that there should be a lot more men in prison and a lot more prisons built, but he equally wants plenty of prisons built for women.
Okay.
But so it's one of the areas that we disagree on.
Yeah, I'd probably lean towards Elizabeth did a very good talk, and
she did. No, I agree. I'm 100% as one with Elizabeth on that. So here we have a situation where 95% of prisoners in the UK are men, and the government's stated intention is to close women's prisons and open more prisons for men.
Yeah, it's
just astonishing. Number 12, raising public awareness through humour. I think the men's rights movement should be employing humour as a weapon far more than it does. It is so. I mean, humour is such a guy thing, isn't it? It's something that we're men are far stronger at than women. Especially feminist comedians. I can't even use the term without laughing. It's sort of like what is it? Tautology. I can't remember what the term is. Something that two opposites. I mean, a feminist comedian. Dear God. Now, feminists might be powerful, but they're also laughable. They're ludicrous and they're ridiculous. So now there are some great content providers of sort of anti-feminist and so on. And I'm thinking here of people like Dr. Randa McCann,
sure,
and Goodfella. Is that how he's? Now there's going to be a couple of comedians at the next Messages for Men event, and hopefully comedians at future ICMIs. And we have on the J4MB website an amazing comedy channel, the main part of which is a playlist of videos, I think more than 70 now.
Okay.
And I've mirrored that playlist on my new website, laughingatfeminists.com.
Okay.
And I'm currently in the process of mirroring J4MB blog pieces with humorous content onto my new website, and there's a surprisingly large number of them. I wasn't expecting too many, but there's a lot of them. Which brings me on to my final item.
Okay.
Building a platform for a more substantial and influential political party. And I think in 7 years, I think we've built a really concrete platform for Elizabeth Hobson to take the party to new heights. And as party chairman, I look forward to that and hope to carry on contributing in a number of areas. So those are the 13 things really that I think sort of capture what's gone on, I think, in the last 7 years.
Yeah, no, brilliant. No, that's that's a pretty broad mix. Kind of takes us all the way, from the early days, right up to now, and kind of what would your hopes be for the party, going forward the next 5 years, should we say?
Yeah, I think getting mainstream media exposure, Brian. It's been very frustrating that in recent years. Sorry, let me go right back to the beginning. So February 2013, within a week of launching the party, I was on the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2, 7.5 million people, in a discussion with Laura Bates of the Everyday Whining Project. But we had more mainstream media exposure, and I mean by that particularly TV and radio, up to about 2 years ago, and rather less since. And it's a source of, frustration, really, I guess, that at a time when more and more people are understanding about men's issues and feminism, the coverage of our party has been reducing. And a couple of people have told me independently that they believe the reason for that might be that stuff that we're saying would get more traction today than it would have 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And therefore I think we're effectively on a BBC blacklist. I can't remember the last time I was on BBC TV or radio. It's probably at least.
Do you think that's why it is?
I haven't been able to come up with a better theory, to be honest with you, Brian. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, well, that's interesting, because certainly, for want of a better word, there may have been more of a kind of novelty factor.
That's a good point.
Kind of in the early days, but kind of the very fact that these issues are increasingly becoming more mainstream than, I would certainly say over the time that your organization has been in existence, the BBC is probably kind of, their editorial approach has kind of changed even more sort of towards the left as such.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. No, I mean, even today, if there's a piece on Newsnight or something or other about domestic abuse, you can be sure in the background there'll be images of a cowering woman in the corner with a man with a bat or something. You mentioned the Overton window earlier on, the sort of area of things that are up for for sort of popular discussion and so on. And yeah, I think we have helped move that. And I look at some journalists and columnists, and they're so going in our direction, Brian. I mean, I'm thinking of people like Douglas Murray.
Yeah.
In fact, there's probably 4 or 5 of them at the Spectator alone. So, Douglas Murray is definitely sort of heading in our direction. James Dellingpole, Rod Liddell. Have
you had any interaction with any of them?
We've tried to. It's very frustrating, No, they haven't engaged yet, but I think they will, because it's at some point it'll become silly for them to be writing what they're writing without engaging with the only political party that is saying the same things,
Yeah. Okay. And I suppose kind of, in terms of that list of 13, what's the thing you're most proud of?
I think it might be the ICMIs, Brian. In 2015, I mentioned that for some reason the Houston thing didn't happen. and there was just nobody willing to take on running an ICMI. And you know, there sort of remains a reluctance to this day. I'm not quite sure what it is. And I think some people think it's far more difficult to execute than it actually is, or that the financial risks are just appalling. I think I can claim to have rescued the ICMI series. And again, in 18, there was nobody willing to do it in 18.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I suppose it's a similar situation this year because the Australian one had to be cancelled because of COVID.
Yeah, but it's happening. But we are having an ICMI in November. So, but you know, I just can't give details at the moment. But I'm hoping that we'll have one next year. You know, a major ICMI in the UK next August.
So keep your eye out for a virtual ICMI later in the year and hopefully a London conference in August 2021. My thanks to Mike for taking the time to talk to me about what clearly have been a very busy 7 years. I'll leave links to his social media if you want to send him personal notes of thanks for all his efforts to raise the profile of men's human rights issues in the UK. And I'll also include a link to a fundraiser for his retirement in case you feel like chipping in the price of a few cigars to complement his well-earned pipe and slippers. I'll also include links to the excellent Man-Woman Myth collection of videos that Mike talked about during the interview, and also a playlist of the full set of fascinating speeches from the recent J4MB coordinated conference on domestic violence and abuse. And as Mike said, there are hours and hours of other content to explore on the J4MB website and YouTube channel. So for now, all that remains for me to say is thanks for listening, and as always, if you see an elephant,
can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.